Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very senior and respected corporate leader, a well-known thinker and author from New Delhi, India, Mr. Gurcharan Das. Mr. Das, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Mr. Das is one of India's most celebrated authors and thinkers. He's the former Chief Executive Officer of Procter Gamble India and Managing Director Procter Gamble Worldwide for Strategic Planning. He's an author, and I'd be surprised if any of you have not heard of his books or read some of his books. He's an author of a book titled India Unbound, The Difficulty of Being Good, India Grows at Night, A Liberal Case for a Strong State, and his latest book, which we will talk about, a memoir, Another Sort of Freedom, and many, many more books. So my first question to you is, tell me about your own journey, which has been so amazing.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, sir.
And my journey begins at when I was 3 months old, and I appeared on page 17 in my mother's memoir. And one of the reasons why I know about my childhood is because of my mother wrote a diary. Anyway, she's calling me at 3 months a difficult baby.
Okay.
And then 6 months later, she's calling me a troublesome child. And then a year later, she's calling me a troublemaker. Anyway, I learned to run at the age of 3, and I've been running ever since. And sometimes I seem to run into myself. By the age of 4, I'm in kindergarten, and I keep raising my hand in class, and the teacher keeps saying, no, nahi, nahi, because I want to do something that's not allowed. And then one day she just said, let's just call you Nahi Kumar. It's much easier. Anyway, the name I was given was Ashok Kumar.
Okay.
But my grandmother suspected that my mother had given me that name because she thought my mother was secretly in love with the Bollywood actor named Ashok Kumar.
Yep.
So this wasn't right. You know, in the 1940s, Ashok Kumar was like Amitabh Bachchan and Shah Rukh Khan combined. Anyway, so she took me to a guru. She placed me at his feet, and she told the guru, Enu Nadyo ji, Guru, give this boy a name. And since he saw me placed at his feet, he said, well, let's call him Gurcharan Das. And so overnight, I was transformed from the Prince of Happiness, which is Ashok Kumar, to the humble servant of the feet of the Guru.
What an amazing story.
Gurcharan Das. And, you know, some years later, when I was grown up, I asked the Guru, why did he give me that name? And the Guru said, and he gave me the very best. He said that, you know, it's good to be reminded about humility in life. And then he gave me the very best definition of humility I've ever heard. And it is to take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously. And that, Ashutosh, actually became the dedication of my new book. You know, my new book, Another Sort of Freedom, you mentioned it.
Yeah.
And let me read you the dedication. It says, to the happy few who don't take themselves too seriously.
Amazing.
So in that same kindergarten, when I finished that year, by the way, this was 1947. And I came home sporting a report card. my mother saw me. She was standing at the door and she looked at me and she was waiting at the door and she said, "Did you come first?"
Mhm.
And my father was nearby. And my father said, "That was the wrong question.
Mm.
Ask him what he likes about school.
Mm.
Ask him, does he like to draw?
Mm.
Does he like to sing?
Mm.
Does he like stories?" So very early on, I got to learn two things from my mother, that I had to make a living one day.
Yeah.
And so, but from my father, I learned that I had to make a life.
Mm.
And this has been the recurring motive of my life.
Mhm.
So let's skip to when I'm now 17. I've got a scholarship to Harvard.
Mhm.
I'm at Palam Airport waiting for the Air India flight to take off. My mother has tears in her eyes.
Mm.
And in between those tears, she's saying, "Now remember, work hard,
Mm.
get good marks,
Mm.
and study something useful. You
Mm.
have to come back uh, to get a job."
Right.
And then she says, "Why don't you be like your father? He's an engineer. And India it needs lots of engineers. You'll always get a job." And so I arrived dutifully at Harvard and I sign up and I write my major engineering.
Mhm.
And I have a roommate who is studying Russian literature.
Mhm.
And he's reading the novel Anna Karenina.
Yeah.
And one day over lunch, he says to me, "Gurcharan, if you're going to have an affair with a woman one day,
Mhm.
she should be Anna Karenina." And then
Mm.
he starts talking about how wonderful this woman is.
Mm.
And I'm thinking at lunchtime, I'm thinking, what is this? Here's this guy dreaming of sleeping with Anna Karenina.
Mm.
And look at me.
Mm.
I'm studying pipe friction, calculating pipe friction,
Mm.
and mugging up Bernoulli's equations.
Mm.
Something is wrong.
Mm.
So promptly the next semester, I strike out engineering. And what do I study?
Mhm.
I study in the next 2 years Greek tragedy,
Wow.
Roman history,
Mm.
history of capitalism, Renaissance painting, Bauhaus architecture. I
Mm.
even take a course in Sanskrit.
Wow.
And I'm studying, and there's a course called Sanskrit Love Poetry.
Mhm.
And my mother hears that I'm studying Sanskrit at Harvard.
Mm.
She says, "Hi, hi, mera munda." And a dead language, only the dead will give him a job
Mm.
now.
Mm.
And so my father has to reassure her that, look, don't worry, he's making a life
Mm.
among books.
Mm.
Anyway, I eventually graduate in philosophy.
Mm.
I get a scholarship to go to Oxford to do a PhD, and I'm home in Chandigarh for the summer
Mhm.
between Harvard and Oxford,
Mm.
and um, I suddenly get cold feet one evening,
Mhm.
and I say to myself, "Do I really want to spend the rest of my life at that stratosphere of abstract thought?"
Mhm.
No,
Mm.
I want a life of action.
Yeah.
Now, I have no clue what that life of action is, but quietly I write to Oxford that I'm not coming.
Okay.
And my mother's worst nightmare has come true. She has an unemployed, grown up son at home,
Mm.
Bela, as we say in
Yeah.
Punjabi.
Mm.
And we have and my mother has a nosy neighbor in
Mm.
Chandigarh who comes and visits her often. And she always asks my mother,
Mm.
Oda munda ki kar rahe hai? What is your son doing?
Absolutely.
My mother gets so embarrassed at that question. And when I see that embarrassment on her face, I realize that I should get a job, do something. And so in the next few days, I start looking at the newspaper for wanted ads. And there's a company that makes Vicks Vapor Rub, which wants trainees. Now, so anyway, I apply, I get the job, and suddenly I'm transported from the ivy-covered halls of Harvard to the dusty bazaars of India, where I'm carrying a salesman's bag and asking chemist shops, "Ek dozen, ek free, kitna mangta hai?"
Yes. And that company was Richardson Hindustan, isn't it, sir?
That's
Was
right.
it?
That
Yes.
company was
I remember
Richardson
that.
Hindustan. And then I must tell you, after a few years, I missed the intellectual life. But I liked the rough and tumble of the business world too. And my father sees this sort of discontent when he visits me in Bombay, and he says, "Well, son, you have the weekend. Why don't you make a life in the weekend and do something you really like?" And so one Sunday morning, I sit down to write a play. And I tell myself, it must be a morning like this when Shakespeare too sat down to write Hamlet.
Right.
Now, no sensible person compares himself to Shakespeare. But then at 21 years old and feeling tall, you don't think of being sensible.
Correct.
And so that's how my writing career gets started. I wrote a play called Larin Saab. It won a prize. In those days, 10,000 rupees was a lot of money.
Money, yes.
And a lot of famous writers like Kushwant Singh and all also wrote, but I won the prize. And suddenly the play was produced in Bombay. It was published by Oxford University Press. And so I had a second career and wearing a second hat. And so if things got bad at work on Monday to Friday, I could always go back to my writing. And if things went bad with the writing, a character I couldn't had what they call writer's block. Then I would go back to my work. So it was a nice complementary life. And this way I went to, I was posted next to New York. But it was an American multinational. I was posted in New York. And so I kept writing on weekends. And I wrote a play on Mirabai,
Wow.
the Rajput princess, the poetess who wrote these wonderful bhajans.
On Krishna, yes.
And when I finished that play on Mira, nobody wanted to touch it. But then suddenly one theater in the village agreed to do it. And the director produced it with hard rock music. He set Meera bhajans to hard rock music, which was wonderful.
Right.
Anyway, that's when I met my wife. She went to see the play. It was done off Broadway. And somebody said, "This is the guy who wrote it." So she came to congratulate me, and that's the rest is
Still history. Yeah, absolutely.
But as we move on with the story of journey, when I'm in my mid-40s, I ask the question which many people ask when they get, even whether they're successful or not, they ask, and is this what life is all about?
Correct.
And so you question that. Here I said, I've been working with these great brands. I had P&G and wonderful products like Tide and Ariel detergent and Camay soap and Head and Shoulders shampoo, Pantene shampoo, all these products. I was in charge of global strategic planning at that point. And I was looking for something, it was a struggle to give purpose to my life.
Right.
And so again, my father's idea, it won out over my mother, because I had been making a living and now it was time to make a life.
Correct.
And so I left at the peak of my career and came back to India and settled down to become a writer. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years.
Incredible.
So 30 years in business, 30 years as a writer. And what have I found in this? All I can say is this: making a life, making a living, binary, and a constant kind of struggle to give meaning to my life. What lesson have I learned? One lesson is that, we don't realize, we don't give credit to business people. When I left PNG, I thought I would now become a better human being, but that hasn't happened. Well, I've discovered, having been a business person as well as a writer, that I feel we do not give enough respect to business people. That business people actually are better human beings than writers, artists, academics.
Yeah.
And the reason is that business people depend on others. A businessman has customers and he has to satisfy his customers. A business people has suppliers. He has to be fair to his suppliers. If he tries to squeeze the supplier too hard, he will get hurt because he'll get a defective component. If he has employees, he has to be fair to his employees. If he's not fair, they leave him. And so, whereas a writer doesn't need anyone, he's living in his bubble.
Correct.
I come into this room every morning at 6 o'clock, and I start punching the keys on my computer and writing begins to appear. And I'm absorbed in another world. Whereas, I make sure I don't do email, I don't do WhatsApp, I don't read the newspaper in the morning, I don't do yoga, all the good things about taking a walk, because I'm always afraid of going on someone else's agenda.
Yeah.
And so I write for hours, and the time passes sometimes. Like I say, oh God, 6 hours have passed. I thought it was only 8 o'clock in the morning. It's 12. I lost 4 hours. Those 4 hours, I was in another world.
Lost, yeah.
And I had forgotten myself. It's like Tendulkar. When he was approaching his double century, that famous double century in the end of his career,
Yeah.
they asked him, how did it feel like? The reporter asked, approaching your double century. And he says, I don't know. I wasn't even there. The ball had become so big and the bat had become so big that the bat had to hit the ball. Now, that is the thing about writers.
Correct.
You live by self-forgetting. And so while you're writing, maybe you're a good human being.
Yeah.
But when you're out of your writing, you behave just as egotistically as anybody.
Anyone else.
And I was saying that I went to Khan Market the other day. My new book was out. I didn't see it in the bookshelf. I went charging in to talk to the bookseller. And I said, but where's my book? I'm an important writer. And he puts it in the back of the window. And I said, no, put it in the front. You see? So
yeah,
the reality is, anyway, the key point I'm making is And this is, I mean, before I make that point, I want to just say, because I feel that Bombay people are nicer than Delhi people,
Mhm.
because Bombay is a commercial city.
Mm.
Delhi is an old feudal city which had one CEO and was an emperor. Today we have a prime minister. It's hierarchical. And Bombay has 100,000 CEOs. If you
Mm.
don't like one company, you go to the next one.
Mm.
Much more
Yeah,
horizontal and not
absolutely.
so bad. The
Absolutely.
best thing that's happened to Delhi is Gurgaon.
Mm.
And these arrogant Delhi three people, you know, they are now realizing their children prefer Gurgaon to Delhi.
Absolutely. Well, I live in Gurgaon, so I agree with what you're saying. But so I want to also move to a few questions about your book, another sort of freedom, and which you just showed us. Uh, my first question relating to your book is, how do you define freedom in the context of your memoir? And I know in your story, you have that you've just shared with us, there have been many milestones where you have demonstrated your own freedom to take your own decisions.
Right.
How does it
Well,
differ from conventional understanding?
the book is called Another Sort of
Yes,
Freedom. So that
absolutely.
is a very legitimate question that you're asking me.
Yes, sir.
And really it goes back to, you know, when I was that restless baby,
Mhm.
and my life has been a constant search to give purpose and meaning to life.
Mhm.
And all the four incidents I related
Yeah.
to you,
Mhm.
where I did the unconventional
Mhm.
thing,
Mhm.
uh, I think was a search for
Mhm.
that that freedom.
Right.
And it's also in many ways the it's also, it really goes, what I've now realized is it goes back also that this sort of freedom is precisely the freedom that the guru
Mhm.
was talking about
Mhm.
when he said to take your work seriously but not yourself seriously.
Correct.
So
Correct.
when I talked about self-forgetting
Mhm.
as a writer,
Mhm.
as a you I'm not trying to suggest that I've achieved it,
Mhm.
but at least it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
That idea of, so I think every human being, look, the reality is every human being wants to be a somebody.
Correct.
Nobody wants to be a nobody.
Mhm.
And so to some extent, we all have to care for ourselves. Now, caring for yourself is important, but that caring for yourself quick very often moves to becoming too much self-important,
Mhm.
too much vanity,
Mhm.
too much desire for premium treatment all the time,
Mhm.
you know? And it's a good lesson in humility that the guru was giving me.
Mhm.
And frankly, if you are, when I feel
Mhm.
that self-forgetting, when I'm a writer,
Mhm.
I achieve a degree of what in Sanskrit is called laghima.
Mhm.
Laghima means lightness.
Correct.
You learn to be light,
Mhm.
remove the burden from your shoulders.
Mhm.
If you don't think you are the center of the universe, you have achieved a certain lightness of spirit.
Mhm.
Light, not like a feather, but like a bird.
Mhm.
And even Patanjali talks about
Yeah.
it. It's in his
Mhm.
Yoga Sutras
Mhm.
about this.
Yeah.
And that is really the freedom. But it's another, this freedom is another form of moksha.
Mhm.
We have this in our Hinduism,
Yeah.
we have the four purusharthas: artha, dharma, kama, moksha.
Correct.
The moksha is, we associate it with a very spiritual state.
Mhm.
Well, I associate it with a very simple human
Mhm.
desire for a certain kind of lightness, a certain kind of It's not to be free from birth and rebirth, which the religious people will tell you. It's in this world you can experience when you are not bound down by your ego, and you are able to relate to others. And it's what we've been talking about.
But sir, what role would spirituality play in your concept of the other sort of freedom?
Well, in fact, it's a very secular idea, but it's also very spiritual, because every human being, every spirit wants that sense of freedom in life. You know, in our daily life, we are oppressed all the time, oppressed by burdens of all kinds, expectations that others have of us, expectations your family has of you, and very often expectations your ego creates for you to be an important person. If you're free of that, that is really quite a spiritual state that you've achieved. So you don't need God, you don't need an afterlife to achieve this sort of spiritual sense of freedom and lightness.
Very well said.
It's like our gods, you know. Our gods, we have a notion of Leela. Ram Leela, Krishna Leela.
Absolutely.
And our gods, when they are playing, they are creating the universe. I mean, Shiva, the god Shiva, he's dancing the Tandava dance, and he's creating the universe. He's playing.
Correct.
So let's learn from our gods.
Correct.
That play is the center of making a life, for making another sort of freedom.
And, you know, as I was listening to your story, you know, from the time you decided to choose different subjects instead of pursuing engineering, to giving up Oxford, to giving up PNG and starting off on it, I wanted to ask you a question for all my viewers and listeners. Sir, how has your understanding of freedom evolved over the years, especially after the transition you made after 30 years?
After 30 years of business.
Of your corporate life, and then 30 years as a writer.
Yeah. Well, you know, I don't want to suggest to you that you have to give up your business career in order to make a life, in order to achieve the freedom. There's a wonderful story here about a fellow called Kamble. Kamble worked as a security guard in our company. He came as on the night shift. And he was kind of my mentor, because he had the right attitude. He had, first of all, he was metric pass. He was not a graduate. He didn't know English. And so for him, every day was an exciting day in his life. And if we can treat every day as an exciting day in our lives, we are getting there, here and now. And the second thing about him was he was like a child. Every experience was a new experience. You know how a child is. When it's raining, all the adults, they carry an umbrella. There's a puddle on the road. They go around the puddle carefully. What does a child do? He goes and jumps into the puddle to see how it feels. That sort of childishness is a clue to which Kamble possessed. And Kamble, most important characteristics of Kamble was that he didn't care who got the credit. He did his job, and it wasn't important what the reward was. It's like Krishna's advice,
Mm.
Lord Krishna's advice to Arjuna
Absolutely.
in the Gita, Nishkam karma, nishphala karma, meaning you act for the sake of the action, not for the reward.
Correct.
So all I could give you, talk to you for Kamble for a long time, but I just want to tell you that here was this guy who started as a night guard and how he progressed up in the company. And every job he was given, company quickly knew that they had a very special human being. He taught himself English and he rose and rose. And he just had, I mean, I think he loved his work and he would have paid us to come to work every day.
Amazing.
And frankly, the secret, what is the secret of happiness? Happiness is to love the work you do and love the person you live with. And also fulfill the 4 Purusharthas, Artha, Dharma, Kama, Moksha.
Correct.
And so this book is the 4th volume in that trilogy that you talked about in the beginning.
Yeah.
Artha was India unbound, Dharma was difficulty of being good, Kama was the riddle of desire, and Moksha is another sort of freedom.
Amazing. Amazing. And my last question for you, sir, and this is again for a lot of young people who understandably look up to you and have read all your columns and your books. Based on your own amazing journey, what advice would you give, or what lessons would you want young professionals to take away, especially those who feel trapped by societal expectations and are searching for their own sort of freedom?
Well, my dear chap, that's what I've been talking about for the last half an hour.
I agree.
Which is really, I'll repeat myself.
Yeah.
That we all deserve to live an examined life.
Correct.
Most of us sleepwalk through life.
Correct.
And most of us reach a point in our lives when we say, well, is this what life is all about? And instead of waiting till the end of your life when it's too late, ask the question early. I was lucky my father gave me another pole to work or to revolve around.
Yeah.
But it's really, I mean, you don't have to quit your job. You can find pleasure and freedom in your own job and also. So Kamble did that. So that's really my advice to young people, is that try and do something you really like doing. And then you'll be like Tendulkar, who loved cricket.
Yeah.
And when the ball had become so big and the bat has become so big that the bat just has to. So the self, when you're absorbed in something you love, the self disappears. And so the art of self-forgetting is that sort of mantra, and not taking yourself too seriously.
Correct. And on that note, sir, and your incredible conversation with us about your own journey, I think everything that you told us from the time you were 2 months old till you were running Procter Gamble's worldwide strategic planning group, to the time you decided to chuck it all up and become a full-time author, every sentence that you've told us today has a lesson in it. And I think we can all continue to listen to your comments over and over again, because there's so much more to be able to draw from everything that you've told us. I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Mr. Gurcharan Das's book, Another Sort of Freedom. I have a copy with me. It's an absolutely brilliant book. I've read some of his earlier work also. Do go and check it out. But thank you, sir, for speaking to us, and all the very best to you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called you.